Just 1 minute ago, the royal palace confirmed what no one saw coming. Prince George, still a child in the public's eyes, has been granted unprecedented security clearance, typically reserved for monarchs and top intelligence officials. The bombshell announcement sent ripples across Britain and stirred unrest within palace walls. But beneath the headlines, a darker storm brews, one that points directly at Camilla's family. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. In the blink of an eye, the monarchy's delicate veil of tradition was torn asunder. What was once a symbolic heirloom of titles and protocol has now become a fortress under siege from secrets, agendas, and unspoken threats. The decision to grant Prince George a level of access that even senior royals have never received wasn't born of sentiment or status. It was made out of necessity. Insiders are calling it a silent alarm, triggered by information too sensitive for public eyes and too volatile for the crown to ignore. And while the public was distracted by ceremonial appearances and choreographed family portraits, something deeply unsettling had been unfolding in the shadows. Why George? Why now? Those close to the inner sanctum suggest it wasn't just about grooming a future king. It was about protecting a child already caught in the crosshairs. The level of clearance bestowed upon him includes intelligence briefings, encrypted communication access, and proximity to restricted royal vaults. This isn't just unprecedented, it's explosive. One intelligence source claimed that this level of access is reserved only for figures with a strategic necessity to know. In short, someone believes George must be prepared not someday, but today. There's growing speculation that this move wasn't simply internal. Leaked whispers from Whitehall indicate a covert briefing took place involving both domestic and foreign intelligence partners, all centered on an imminent threat profile. What triggered such urgency? According to high-level aides, it was a culmination of alarming findings buried within palace archives, evidence that sparked emergency protocols and raised serious concerns regarding potential manipulation from within the royal household itself. And at the heart of the turmoil sits Queen Camilla's extended family, whose quiet presence within royal circles has suddenly become the subject of intense scrutiny. Their once unchallenged influence is now regarded with suspicion. Members of Camilla's circle have allegedly started making frantic calls, deleting years of communications, and attempting to disassociate from past financial dealings now under renewed examination. "They're not just afraid," said one anonymous insider. "They're cornered." The palace's silence speaks volumes. This is not a move taken lightly, and certainly not one taken without consequence. Aides close to William and Catherine were said to be visibly shaken upon learning of the intelligence behind the clearance decision. One even described the atmosphere as post-crisis. For them, this isn't a protocol update, it's a line drawn in the sand. The level of secrecy surrounding the process has only fueled more questions. George wasn't merely added to the list, he was moved to the top of it. But if granting a child royal access to state secrets is shocking, what triggered it might be even more dangerous. And it begins with an internal intelligence report that never should have been seen. A leaked report buried in the royal archives for over a decade has emerged an internal MI5 file marked Classified Crown Threat Protocol tied to Camilla's extended family. It's this explosive document, insiders claim, that forced the monarchy to accelerate George's security clearance. The contents? So sensitive, even the Prime Minister wasn't briefed in full. What began as a simple audit of dormant intelligence files quickly spiraled into a constitutional earthquake. The report, first flagged during a routine security overhaul, bore a chilling header: Potential Internal Subversion Royal Access Watchlist. Within it lay a labyrinth of connections between certain relatives of Queen Camilla and entities considered threats to national interests. Intelligence officers were stunned. Some of the names mentioned had attended private royal events. Others had been quietly granted informal access to royal residences under the guise of family hospitality. The implications weren't merely political, they were personal. The palace, known for its impenetrable silence, suddenly found itself racing against time to manage the fallout. The file referred to alleged influence agents operating under the radar, individuals embedded within business networks closely tied to foreign regimes, some of whom had social ties to Camilla's side of the family. It was no longer just about optics or protocol. The report outlined financial interference, documented through wire transfers, shell companies, and shadow investments dating back more than 20 years. Surveillance photographs, intercepted communications, and behavioral profiling painted a grim picture, one of slow, subtle manipulation, aimed at pulling threads within the monarchy from the inside out. What truly sent alarm bells ringing was the implication that the royal family had been unwittingly compromised. George's unprecedented security clearance wasn't ceremonial, it was defensive. He was being groomed not just as a future monarch, but as a strategic heir, someone who had to be aware, involved, and protected, because the threat wasn't from the outside. It was already inside the gates. According to one palace source, this wasn't about inheritance, this was about survival. George had to know. He had to be given tools none of us had at that age. The atmosphere shifted almost overnight. Meetings, once dominated by ceremonial discussions, now buzzed with urgency, strategy, and fear. Tensions erupted behind closed doors. Charles, already burdened by his role and health concerns, was reportedly caught completely off guard. Advisors close to him urged discretion, but the truth had fractured trust. William, long seen as the stabilizer, allegedly demanded full transparency and access to every document, regardless of protocol. Camilla, unaware her relatives had been under quiet surveillance, was left speechless when confronted with names and dates only she could explain. The revelations weren't just inconvenient, they were explosive. What else, then, had been hidden? And who knew? Within the palace walls, fear began to take root, not just fear of scandal, but fear of betrayal, of manipulation that had been hiding in plain sight. Old alliances cracked, whispers turned into accusations, and previously loyal courtiers began submitting resignations under the guise of health and retirement. What had been uncovered was just the beginning. While the document rattled corridors of power, it was a secret council meeting held without Camilla's knowledge that set everything into motion. As Camilla slept, three of the monarchy's most powerful players gathered in silence. Princess Anne, Prince Edward, and Prince William met in a windowless chamber deep beneath Windsor, a location known only to senior royals. Their goal wasn't ceremonial. It was war planning. And the target: Camilla's unchecked influence and the secrets buried within her bloodline. The hour was past midnight when the emergency meeting was called. No royal press team, no private secretaries, not even Charles was informed. Only the most loyal, most silent palace guards knew what was happening beneath the palace stone. The classified report on Camilla's extended family had sent shockwaves through the crown's deepest layers, and now the monarchy's equilibrium was teetering. Princess Anne, with her trademark steel and unshakable loyalty to the institution, not individuals, was the first to speak. According to insiders, she didn't mince words. George must be protected at all costs. The line must be drawn here. Her voice, measured but firm, left no room for debate. Prince William sat quietly for a moment before slamming a palm on the table. Those present described him as livid, blindsided by the fact that Camilla's connections had gone unchecked for so long. The betrayal wasn't just political, it was personal. His son was being drawn into a storm orchestrated in silence, and he would not allow George to become collateral damage. The decision was swift and irrevocable. The full weight of the royal intelligence apparatus would now pivot toward internal protection, and if that meant cutting off Camilla's influence altogether, so be it. Prince Edward, ever the strategist, quickly backed a bold proposal to initiate an internal audit of all communication channels, staff affiliations, and social relationships involving anyone in Camilla's orbit. "We're not just protecting the crown," he reportedly said. "We're cleaning house." The plan included new digital protocols, surveillance purges, and the quiet reassignment of royal protection officers. Camilla's name, notably, was left off the clearance discussion list entirely. Not only was she excluded from the new oversight measures, but her proximity to information regarding George's elevation was to be minimized without public acknowledgement. It was a coup within the crown, subtle, bloodless, but strategic and irreversible. What no one said aloud, yet all understood, was that this marked the beginning of a shift in royal power. William had begun forging alliances, not just within the family, but with state intelligence cutting across the ancient boundary between the monarchy and the government. George's future was no longer ceremonial. He was being positioned as a protected sovereign in training, a symbol of continuity untouched by scandal, and now a guarded asset. Anne, Edward, and William agreed. The royal family must evolve or be consumed from within. But before the plan could fully unfold, one of Camilla's trusted staff uncovered part of the agenda, and within hours, everything spiraled. He was her most trusted aide, a man Camilla once described as closer than family. But when he stumbled upon an encrypted file detailing her relatives' flagged international ties, he made the decision to leak. What followed was a betrayal that sent Camilla into a frenzy and triggered a wave of denials and damage control. His name remains protected, redacted from every internal memo, but palace insiders confirm he held a senior position close enough to access confidential briefings and private digital archives. The moment he discovered the file buried deep in a classified palace directory, masked behind ceremonial event logistics, he knew what he was seeing wasn't meant for public eyes. What began as suspicion turned into horror. The data, quietly compiled by palace security and later cross-referenced with intelligence flags, outlined financial activity linking Camilla's cousin to multiple international transactions, each one routed through jurisdictions already under diplomatic scrutiny. The aide didn't hesitate. He bypassed his chain of command and took the file straight to internal intelligence officers embedded within the Royal Protection Unit. The fallout was instant. Royal communications between select staff and external consultants, emails, phone logs, encrypted messaging services were seized. The leak triggered a full-spectrum scramble. Camilla, when first confronted, reportedly dismissed the entire matter as fabrication. But when shown the timestamps and corresponding document chains, her expression darkened. Rage followed disbelief. She demanded to know who had betrayed her, pacing through Clarence's house in a visible storm. Staff described her as completely unmoored, not just furious, but shaken to the core. She had ruled her domain through loyalty, and that foundation had cracked. The betrayal wasn't limited to her. The leak forced King Charles into an impossible position. For the first time in his reign, he was forced to weigh not only public perception, but the legitimacy of the monarchy's internal security. His advisors were split. Some begged him to shield Camilla, to control the narrative before the press caught scent. Others urged full transparency, warning that covering up would make the situation worse. Charles, caught between a wife spiraling and a crown under siege, was paralyzed. His silence, even for a day, fractured long-standing trust within the family. Meanwhile, the Royal Communications Office went into overdrive. Statements were drafted and torn up. Teams were reshuffled. Former staffers were called back under NDAs. Every social media post, public appearance, and press inquiry was combed for potential fallout triggers. But the one thing they couldn't spin the truth was already in motion. Camilla's inner circle, once a tight web of quiet control, began to unravel. Allies distanced themselves. Old associates turned unresponsive. Her world, once untouchable, now bristled with suspicion. Whispers about what else might be buried became impossible to ignore. This wasn't just a scandal. It was a collapse of control, loyalty, and legacy. With trust eroded and secrets spilling, the palace had no choice but to dig deeper. What they found next would shake the monarchy's moral foundation. A shadow trail of offshore investments has now been linked directly to members of Camilla's extended family. Hidden behind layers of corporate shells and foreign fronts, the money allegedly traces back to accounts used to curry favor, influence public narratives, and even more shockingly fund internal palace operations. At first, the numbers seemed like ordinary transactions, donations to cultural foundations, foreign estate developments, and vague consulting fees. But as forensic financial experts peeled back each layer, a pattern emerged, one of hidden influence woven through discrete payments. The origin points were as alarming as the destinations. Funds flowed from obscure offshore trusts in the Caribbean, cycled through Eastern European holding companies, and landed in accounts connected to organizations that had, in recent years, gained surprising access to royal initiatives. One trail, in particular, led investigators directly to a property developer with familial ties to Camilla, a man whose name had been quietly scrubbed from several guest lists in previous years. These financial threads weren't random, they were deliberate. Internal royal estate decisions, particularly those involving land rights, renovations, and symbolic rebranding, had all been lobbied for, and it now appears, possibly influenced using these very funds. The shell firms weren't just laundering money, they were shaping the monarchy's public image from behind the scenes. Messaging platforms, digital PR campaigns, and strategic media placements designed to reinforce Camilla's presence in the royal spotlight had all been indirectly bankrolled by this hidden network. The scale was vast, the intent calculated. Prince George, now central to the monarchy's future, became even more vulnerable under this revelation. If palace operations were being quietly steered by outside interests, then George's rising role wasn't just symbolic, it was critical. Sources close to William confirmed the prince was briefed on contingency safeguarding protocols, a phrase never before used in relation to a royal child. There was no longer a question of whether a threat existed. The threat had been confirmed, and it had been operating from within the very system meant to protect him. To prevent an all-out collapse, external security advisors were called in for the first time since the Diana inquest era. Their investigation expanded rapidly, encompassing travel records, speech drafts, and staffing contracts. What they found only deepened the crisis. Certain employees had been paid through third-party consultancies linked to Camilla's cousin's business interests. Others had been granted access to documents well above their clearance level. It was infiltration without force, persuasion masked as loyalty. In the aftermath, legal silence agreements, gag orders in all but name were issued to multiple former staff members. Some accepted them without hesitation, others walked away and haven't been heard from since. But the question remains, how many knew, and how long had this been allowed to fester? Trust, already fragile, had been shattered, and while Charles publicly maintained composure, those closest to him admitted he was quietly devastated. But if money was used to manipulate, there was something even more dangerous: information locked within Camilla's private files, until one was mysteriously leaked. One email, forwarded by mistake, landed in the hands of a royal IT contractor. Within it, a stunning reference to George's vulnerability and a time frame for opportunity left investigators reeling. While Camilla denied any knowledge, the content was enough to launch a full-scale inquiry into potential manipulation, and it wasn't just emails. The contractor was conducting routine checks on internal communications when he noticed an encrypted thread improperly routed to a shared folder. Curiosity turned to dread as he decrypted the message. The sender, a name loosely tied to Camilla's distant nephew, had mistakenly copied in a palace domain. The content was jarring. Cloaked in ambiguous phrasing, it referenced an upcoming window of uncertainty and alluded to George as a critical leverage point. The email didn't outright state a plan, but the subtext was undeniable. Intelligence personnel described it as threat adjacent, noting its coded undertones and strategic phrasing consistent with coercive psychological tactics. The discovery sent shockwaves through the digital infrastructure of the monarchy. Devices were seized, servers were mirrored, phone records, email logs, even archived social media messages from extended family members were pulled into the growing net of suspicion. This was no longer a matter of loyalty or image, it had become a direct question of security, and the royal firewall had been breached from the inside. Catherine, who had been briefed just hours after the discovery, reportedly went white with disbelief. This was her son, her heir. She demanded an immediate private audience with King Charles, pushing past layers of protocol. No intermediaries, no advisors. According to a senior courtier, her message to the monarch was clear and resolute. If you do not act now, the crown won't survive this war. It was not a plea, it was a warning. Charles, already walking a fragile line between public image and internal control, was shaken. The notion that someone within his wife's bloodline might be quietly plotting, or at the very least discussing his grandson's vulnerability, was more than betrayal. It was treason in spirit, if not yet in law. In the hours that followed, Queen Camilla's aides launched a frantic sweep of communications history. Devices were reset, files were wiped. Some older staffers were quietly dismissed under the cover of retirement, but not fast enough. Independent cyber specialists brought in by palace advisors uncovered long-dormant malware embedded in internal messaging platforms, malware that had been siphoning metadata to anonymous servers across Europe. Who had placed it, and why, remained unclear. But it pointed to a campaign of observation, perhaps even control, that had operated without detection for years. As panic spread behind the scenes, palace protocol teams began purging outdated clearance structures and rewriting internal access codes. A quiet revolution was underway, an overhaul not just of security, but of legacy trust. Prince George's digital identity was completely restructured. His personal devices were replaced with military-grade alternatives. Only 4 people were permitted unfiltered access to his communications, and Camilla was not one of them. As the internal chaos grew louder, public appearances told a different story, but the pressure was about to erupt into full public spectacle. In a rare private encounter away from flashing cameras, Catherine, Princess of Wales, confronted Camilla with a composed but cutting message. "I won't let George be a pawn." The words, said to be delivered in a firm but calm voice, marked a turning point in palace politics and ended decades of silent toleration. For years, Catherine had maintained a studied diplomacy, polite smiles, measured appearances, and a near impenetrable grace under pressure. But behind palace doors, the storm had been building. With each whisper of compromised security, with each new revelation linking Camilla's family to deeper royal manipulation, Catherine's restraint began to crack. She was no longer simply a royal consort. She was the mother of a future king, and she had watched long enough. The private confrontation, held during what was meant to be a routine family meeting, shifted the atmosphere the moment the doors closed. No aides, no advisors, just 2 women standing at the center of the monarchy's moral reckoning. Eyewitnesses waiting outside the room reported hearing nothing, but the look on Camilla's face when she exited said everything. Visibly shaken, one courtier whispered, she didn't say a word, not even to her own staff. For a woman who had always maintained tight control over her narrative, this moment was a collapse of composure, and it sent ripples through the entire royal household. Catherine, in contrast, walked out with steady steps and unbroken eye contact, as if a silent line had finally been drawn in stone. From that moment forward, George's safety transformed from a quiet concern to Catherine's personal mission. She demanded oversight, challenged outdated protocols, and ordered a full review of every individual with access to her children. Her influence, which had long been underestimated, suddenly became impossible to ignore. And standing behind her, unwavering, was Prince William. Palace insiders say he backed her decision completely, even going so far as to cancel scheduled appearances to focus on internal matters. The image of royal unity cracked, but in its place, something more formidable emerged, a protective force willing to challenge even the highest ranks of the royal machine. The confrontation also exposed a deep, unspoken rift between the monarchy's 2 most powerful women. For years, Camilla had subtly positioned herself as an anchor of Charles's reign, a stabilizing presence amidst the chaos of succession. But Catherine's rise was no longer quiet. It was intentional, and it was backed by the next generation of the crown. What had once been whispers between staff became open discussion. Allegiances began to shift. Some aides quietly moved to Catherine's side, seeking reassignment. Others, loyal to Camilla, found themselves frozen out of decision-making spaces they once dominated. Behind the formality of royal events, a civil war of influence was unfolding, and at its center stood two women, one guarding the legacy of her husband's throne, the other protecting the future of her sons. The quiet deference that had defined their relationship for so long was gone. What remained was a cold standoff between survival and succession. But while Camilla faced backlash inside the palace, outside, the public was about to receive a carefully curated and shockingly deceptive narrative. In a polished press release, Buckingham Palace called the security upgrade for George standard protocol and dismissed malicious speculation. But that same day, anonymous sources leaked contradictory briefings, revealing the royal family's battle over truth. Behind the scenes, the monarchy was in lockdown, battling ghosts it could no longer silence. The carefully crafted statement came just hours after Catherine's confrontation with Camilla, and it struck many as cold and rehearsed. According to the palace, there was nothing to see, just routine adjustments in a modern monarchy. Yet nothing about this situation was routine. The language was clinical, detached, and eerily absent of any mention of the swirling controversies engulfing the palace walls. While the public was being fed reassurances, something else entirely was unfolding behind closed doors. And for the first time in years, the royal mask was beginning to slip. Camilla's abrupt absence from several high-profile appearances raised eyebrows. Scheduled to attend a state dinner, she reportedly pulled out due to exhaustion. But insiders claimed otherwise. Behind palace gates, she was battling both isolation and fallout. The press began circling, their polite curiosity shifting to aggressive pursuit. Tabloids hinted at tension. Broadsheets whispered of a brewing power vacuum. Camilla's silence, once a strategic asset, was now deafening and dangerous. Meanwhile, William and Catherine refused to speak publicly. Every request for comment was declined. Every appearance was calculated. Their silence only fed the fire. With no official narrative to cling to, speculation spiraled. Was this a rift in the royal hierarchy? Was Camilla being sidelined? Had George's clearance marked the beginning of a new era, or the dismantling of an old one? Outside the palace, independent journalists took matters into their own hands. Investigations were launched into Camilla's extended family names, once relegated to gossip columns, were now front-page material. Business records, international connections, and old photographs began surfacing, creating a web of associations that painted a troubling picture. Camilla's camp remained quiet, but every non-answer became an answer in itself. Then came the leak. Grainy but unmistakable images circulated among select media circles, documents being loaded into unmarked vehicles, destined for the Windsor vaults. The files were said to contain internal reviews, intelligence reports, and financial assessments too sensitive to remain in the main archives. Their removal was no ceremonial gesture. It was a strategic repositioning, one meant to protect legacy, reassign blame, or both. Within the palace, senior advisors began drafting what they referred to as succession contingency plans. On paper, these were mere hypotheticals. In reality, they were a preparation for seismic change. The question no longer was whether the monarchy would be reshaped, it was when and how deep the fracture would run. Lines had been drawn. George's elevation was no longer a whisper of the future, it was a declaration. As whispers of royal succession strategies grow louder, one question looms over Britain's future. What role will George really play, and what will Camilla lose? He is the boy who never asked for power, but Prince George may now carry the weight of royal destiny far earlier than intended. With Camilla's family under investigation, and the monarchy shifting its loyalties, the young prince stands at the center of a silent revolution. But at what cost to innocence, loyalty, and the future of the crown? What began as a precaution has now evolved into something far more calculated. George, once shielded from the machinery of royal operations, now finds himself increasingly present in confidential briefings and internal discussions, seated not just as an heir, but as a participant. Trusted advisors, once used to speaking over his head, are now instructed to speak directly to him. He listens. He asks questions. He remembers. Sources say it was Anne who insisted the boy be given more access, not for ceremony, but for survival. The threat she argued, was no longer hypothetical. And if George was being targeted, whether through influence or subversion, he needed to understand the world of enemies and allies far sooner than anyone had imagined. To support this transformation, the palace brought in psychological advisors, experts in resilience, training, behavioral conditioning, and emotional protection. This wasn't about education. It was about preparing a child for battle in a palace wrapped in velvet but hiding sharpened blades. These sessions, discreet and private, were tailored for a child born into legacy, but now forced into readiness. No official announcement was made, but those closest to the inner circle began noticing subtle shifts: George's reduced public outings, his quiet withdrawals from events once deemed essential. The monarchy was building him into something new, a sovereign in waiting, fully aware, emotionally fortified, and strategically shielded. Meanwhile, Camilla faded from the public eye entirely. What was first described as rest soon became whispers of something deeper. An emotional breakdown, some said. Others believed she had been asked to step back amid increasing pressure. Either way, she vanished from the frame. Her allies dwindled, her influence dried up, and still, not a word from Charles. Not in defense, not in denial. He was seen only in private chapel visits and long walks through the grounds of Sandringham, often alone. Those close to him said he began asking spiritual questions, seeking counsel not from political advisors, but clergy. In the face of so many fractures, he appeared like a man burdened by a choice too cruel to voice: stand by his wife, or stand by the future of the crown. Princess Anne, ever the strategist, didn't wait. She began drafting new protocols, behind-the-scenes documents meant to limit Camilla's access to sensitive material, reassign loyalists, and shift internal power away from what many now saw as a compromised branch. The royal order was being rewritten, quietly, efficiently, and most of all, permanently. Then came the final twist. George's clearance was expanded again. Not just sustained, but deepened. He was now granted access not only to briefing materials, but to classified legacy archives, documents pertaining to the history of internal royal sabotage, constitutional emergencies, and even counterintelligence alliances with MI5. No royal of his age had ever been given such authority. This was no longer a temporary adjustment. This was a long-term strategy, a realignment, a warning. As the monarchy's chessboard resets, one thing is clear: this isn't just about power or scandal, it's about survival. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.